concluded. Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is addressed to the Prime Minister. By Christmas, 160,000 Australians will join the 1 million already unemployed. Why is the Prime Minister racking up $1 trillion of Liberal debt during the Morrison recession while leaving so many Australians behind?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition would know, because we have reminded him on numerous occasions in this place, Mr Speaker, that were it not for the actions taken by this government when the coronavirus hit, when COVID-19 hit, Mr Speaker, with the record support we've provided through JobKeeper and JobSeeker and the many other support measures, 700,000 additional Australians would have been out of work. And, Mr Speaker, we also know that in recent months 760,000 jobs that had been lost and reduced to 0 hours have come back, Mr Speaker. And we know under measured employment, Mr Speaker, that just under 60% of the jobs that have come back have been for women, and there has been a very strong comeback also for young people, Mr Speaker. Our budget, released and delivered by the Treasurer last night, is a plan for economic recovery to get Australians back into jobs, Mr Speaker. Our plan is one for recovery that gets businesses with their doors open and investing again and hiring people, Mr Speaker. The economic plan that was contained in last night's budgets builds on the considerable support that has enabled Australians to be weathering through this crisis, with the blow cushioned by the measures that have been put in place to support them. And, Mr Speaker, those jobs will keep coming back because of the measures that we put in place and we announced last night in the budget. There is still a long way back, but I tell you, Mr Speaker, in this country the road back is a lot shorter than the road back that will have to be travailed by those in many economies overseas. Because, Mr Speaker, it has been in Australia, through the great will and resilience and strength of the Australian people, supported by a government who's got their back, Mr Speaker, that ensures that the blow of the COVID recession around the world, something the Leader of the Opposition is oblivious to. Apparently COVID-19 didn't happen in Australia, Mr Speaker. It happened in every single country around the world, and somehow it didn't happen in Australia. Mr Speaker, that diminishes the great loss of Australians in this country because of COVID-19. And if the Leader of the Opposition can't work out there's been a COVID pandemic in the world, let alone Australia, Mr Speaker, then he is as clueless as the Australian people know him to be. As clueless as they know him to be, and as inexperienced when it comes to issues of economic policy and budget management as his record demonstrates, Mr Speaker. Our government, Mr Speaker, has ensured that we've been there for Australians over the last 6 months as this pandemic recession has hit this nation, and has ensured the jobs are coming back, and the jobs will continue to come back because of the plan for jobs recovery that was released and outlined and delivered by the Treasurer last night.
Has concluded. I call the member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister outline to the House how the Morrison government's economic recovery plan is focused on rebuilding our economy from the effects of the COVID-19 recession, creating jobs and securing Australia's future?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Lindsay for her question. And I know the member for Lindsay will be very pleased as a result of her very strong advocacy of the local member. There's an extra $63.5 million, doubling our current funding for Dunheved Road, Mr Speaker. And that is a great job that has been done by the member for Lindsay on behalf of her constituents in the seat of Lindsay, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, this budget that was delivered by the Treasurer is about jobs, and we are already on the road back when it comes to the recovery of jobs in this country. It's about keeping people in jobs. It's about getting people in jobs, Mr Speaker. As the Treasurer said, there is no economic recovery in this country unless there is a jobs recovery. There is no budget recovery in this country unless there is a jobs recovery, and that's why last night was a budget that had a plan to ensure that we have that jobs recovery in this country. It is a plan to recover from the COVID-19 recession to ensure that there is a coalition-led jobs recovery in this country in the months and in the years ahead, Mr Speaker. A budget that is going to lay the groundwork and provide the measures to rebuild the Australian economy for the future, and to do that while guaranteeing the essentials that Australians rely on by growing our economy, not increasing taxes and increasing the burdens on Australians who deserve to keep more of what they earn, Mr Speaker, and our government continues to keep our pledge and our promise to them that in this country you will always keep more of what you earn under a Liberal National Government. We have demonstrated that budget after budget, year after year, term after term, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, our plan, Mr Speaker, has been cushioning the blow and will continue to enable Australians and the businesses that employ them to weather the storm that we are going through at this very difficult time for Australians. Our budget is about recovering the lost ground, as I've already outlined, as those jobs start coming back, Mr Speaker, and that is achieved, Mr Speaker, by bringing forward the tax relief for hard-working Australians, particularly those on low and middle incomes, bringing forward the investment decisions of Australian businesses with our investment allowance, Mr Speaker, bringing forward the decisions of businesses to employ more Australians through the JobMaker hiring credit, bringing forward, Mr Speaker, the infrastructure spending which the Deputy Prime Minister has been leading all around this country, Mr Speaker, and the budget is about rebuilding for the future. The training and skills reforms that are going to get 340,000 places delivered this year, Mr Speaker. The 12,000 additional university places on top of the 17,000 additional places for next year, Mr Speaker, that the Minister has already outlined.
Prime Minister's time has concluded. The member for Rankin.
Yeah, thank you, Speaker. My question is for the Treasurer. Nearly 1 million Australians on JobSeeker over the age of 35 are ineligible for the government's hiring credit announcement. Why has the government blown out Liberal debt to $1 trillion during this Morrison recession while still leaving so many Australians behind?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I never thought I'd see the day when the Labor Party was attacking a program which was designed to get young people from JobSeeker into work, Mr Speaker. I never thought I would see the day. When the Labor Party was seeking to make politics by pitting young people against senior Australians, Mr Speaker. The reality is, and he asked me about the JobMaker hiring credit, it is designed to support 450,000 jobs, Mr Speaker. And we have a number of programs which are designed to support senior Australians who have been out of work, Mr Speaker, and designed to provide with incentives of up to $10,000 to employers to take them on, Mr Speaker. We have those programs in place, Mr Speaker. But the reality is we have announced a series of measures last night which are going to help grow the economy and get that unemployment rate down from its peak of around 8% at the end of this year. And you should not see one program in isolation from the comprehensive range of programs. And the Prime Minister talked about the bring forward of tax cuts. And of course we have got $14 billion of infrastructure spending, Mr Speaker, and the loss carry-back measure that is supporting business, as well as the immediate expensing initiative, Mr Speaker, which will support business investment and the productive capacity of our economy. All these measures work in tandem. The Australian economy is a complex ecosystem, Mr Speaker, and our initiatives are working together to do one thing, and that is to create jobs, Mr Speaker. And the measures that we have taken to date as a government have helped save 700,000 jobs, Mr Speaker. And if the member for Rankin dared to look in detail at the budget documents, he would have seen one sentence, Mr Speaker, which explains exactly why we did what we did in last night's budget. And that sentence says that without the economic supports that we have announced last night, the unemployment rate would be 12% this year and 12% next year, Mr Speaker. And so the reality is that COVID-19 has hit the Australian economy and the global economy like an economic shock that we haven't seen before. And we have seen 10% of our workforce either lose their job or see their working hours reduced to zero. More than half are now back, Mr Speaker, and the trend is for more to come back over time. And the measures we took last night are responsible, they are targeted, they are temporary, and they're designed to do one thing: help Australians back into work.
The member for Curtin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline to the House how the Morrison government's plan for jobs, including its JobMaker hiring credit initiative, will lead our economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Curtin for her question and acknowledge her deep experience in the education sector before coming to this place as a professor of law, as a vice-chancellor at the University of Notre Dame, as somebody who understands the importance of job creation, not just across the Curtin electorate, but across the country, Mr Speaker. And the reality is that COVID-19 has wreaked havoc across the world. The equivalent of 600 million jobs have been lost globally. Here in Australia, 10% of the workforce have either seen their jobs lost or their working hours reduced to zero. The Morrison government responded with unprecedented levels of support, and we were able to do so because we approached this crisis from a position of economic strength. JobKeeper, JobSeeker, the cash flow boost, the $750 payments, these have helped save 700,000 jobs. And last night we went further, Mr Speaker. Last night we went further because we understand that there is no economic recovery without a jobs recovery, and there is no budget repair without a jobs recovery. So last night's measures in the budget will help create 950,000 plus jobs, Mr Speaker, and see that unemployment rate come steadily down. And there are initiatives around the tax system, Mr Speaker, there were initiatives around infrastructure, and then of course there was the hiring credit, Mr Speaker. And the hiring credit is designed to help those who are 16 to 35 who have been on JobSeeker, youth allowance other, or the parenting payment, sometime in the last 3 months, get back into work. And we're providing an incentive. We're providing an incentive to business of either $100 or $200 a week, depending on the age of that person, to get into work. And they have to do a minimum of 20 hours, Mr Speaker. This program will run for 12 months, and it will support 450,000 jobs, Mr Speaker. Support 450,000 jobs. And the JobMaker hiring credit is designed to help young people who have been hit hard by this crisis to get into work. So, Mr Speaker, last night's budget came at a very difficult time for our country, where a lot of people are continuing to do it tough. But last night's budget was all about jobs, and the JobMaker hiring credit was a key part of that.
The member for Rankin.
Thanks very much, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What is the peak in dollar terms of the government's mountain of Liberal gross debt?
The Treasurer has the call.
In gross debt, it's $1.7 trillion, and that is at the end of the medium term. And, Mr Speaker, in 2030,
Members on both sides, the Treasurer has the call.
Mr Speaker, near the end of the medium term, but I want to emphasise to the member for Rankin. Obviously, these are projections across the medium term, and what we're focused on is getting more people into work, because that is the way that you can repair the budget, Mr Speaker. And we were able to spend as was necessary through this crisis because we approached it from a position of economic strength. Because we delivered the first balanced budget. Because we delivered the first balanced budget, Mr Speaker,
Member for Rankin, in
11 years, because we saw welfare dependency at a 30-year low, and because when we came to government, unemployment was at 5.7%, but in February, ahead of the crisis, it was 5.1%, Mr Speaker. So the measures that we have taken over the last 6 and a bit years have strengthened the balance sheet of the country so that we could respond to this crisis, Mr Speaker, and that has allowed us to help save 700,000 jobs. And I repeat for the member for Rankin that in the budget last night it makes it very clear that but for the measures we have taken and announced, the unemployment rate would have reached 12% and been sustained at that level this year and next year, Mr Speaker. So last night's budget was all about jobs, helping those who are out of a job get into a job and helping those who are in work today stay in work. This is an economic crisis like Australia has never seen before, and our measures are designed to help those Australians in need.
The member for Warringah.
Thank you. To the Treasurer, we have no National Integrity Commission, and the only department shining a light on outrageous misuse of public funds, like the Leppington land sale, is the Australian National Audit Office. With their number of performance audits already down last financial year due to insufficient funding, and now a further 12% cut to funding for performance audits in last night's budget, how can the Australian people have confidence that your record-breaking spending doesn't lead to record-breaking pork barrelling and mismanagement of taxpayer dollars?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think the question is probably best directed to myself, and so I'll be happy to provide the response. There is a 10-year review going in, currently underway, into the ANAO and what their resourcing requirements are. And like there are many reviews currently before the government, Mr Speaker—
Prime Minister, pause. The member for Barton and others prevent me from hearing the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So there is a 10-year review currently underway, and when the government receives the outcomes of that 10-year review, we will consider the resourcing for the ANAO. Mr Speaker, there is a number of other reviews that are currently before the government. Of course, royal commissions that are still to hand down reports. And as the Treasurer indicated last night, when those reports have been received, then the government will be providing a fulsome response. And so when we receive that report, then the government will make its response in terms of their ongoing resourcing.
And I now call the member for Fisher.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer update the House on how the Morrison government is delivering further tax relief to ensure hard-working Australians can keep more of what they earn, which will be of critical importance as we come out the other side of the COVID-19 recession? And is the Treasurer aware of any alternative policies?
The Treasurer.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Fisher for his question. The member for McMahon, his interjection, maybe it's because he was the co-architect of $387 billion of higher taxes. He does want to hear about lower taxes. Now, Mr Speaker, the member for Fisher has been a tradie, he's been a barrister, and now he's working hard for his constituents, Mr Speaker. And he knows that the economic shock that Australia is facing right now has required a comprehensive full-court press as our response. And our response was laid out in the budget last night, and it was all about jobs, helping those Australians who are out of work get into work and those who are in a job stay in a job, Mr Speaker. And we're now starting to see people get back to work as the virus is suppressed, as restrictions are eased, and that is a positive sign. I'm asked about taxes, Mr Speaker, and on this side of the House we always believe in lower taxes, Mr Speaker. The Coalition believes in lower taxes, and that is because we believe that Australians should keep more of what they earn. People should keep more of what they earn. Now, at the last election there was a clear contrast between the two sides as to we were for lower taxes, the other side was for higher taxes. $387 billion of higher tax. The member for Rankin interjects. That's because we know that he likes to tax a lot, Mr Speaker. We know he likes to tax a lot, and so does the member for McMahon, whose head is buried.
Member
now,
for
Mr
Rankin.
Speaker, we have cut taxes for SMEs. We have cut taxes for income earners. Mr Speaker, we have introduced the instant asset write-off. And last night we announced to bring forward of stage 2 of our tax cuts to ensure that more than 11.5 million Australians will get further tax relief. So if you're on $60,000 you will pay $2,160 less tax than you would have before our plan was rolled out, Mr. Speaker. That's mean more money in your pocket, Mr. Speaker, and this will help create some 50,000 jobs across the economy. Now, Mr. Speaker, that was so important to bring forward stage 2, to add an additional year of the low and middle income tax offset and to support more than 11.5 million Australians. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm asked, are there any alternative approaches? And we know it is still on their books to have a retirees tax, to have a housing tax, to have a superannuation tax and to have a higher income tax. Mr. Speaker, only under the coalition will you see lower taxes.
The member for Rankin.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is for the Treasurer. Is the Treasurer aware that he had already more than doubled Australia's debt before coronavirus?
The Treasurer has the call.
Mr. Speaker, we set out last night in the budget what is happening with the trajectory of debt, and it was very clear that net debt was rising to 44% of GDP at the end of the forwards and gross debt to 55%. But, Mr. Speaker, we inherited from the other side, a situation where they baked in spending, and through our measures we were able to balance the budget, Mr. Speaker, for the first time in 11 years.
The Manager of Opposition Business does not have the call. The member for Cowper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Will the Deputy Prime Minister inform the House how the Morrison-McCormack government's plan for jobs and critical investment in infrastructure is supporting regional Australia's recovery from the COVID-19 recession?
The Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do thank the member for his question and acknowledge his advocacy for that mid-North Coast area of New South Wales he represents so proudly and so fiercely. They're good people. They're good people in Coffs Harbour and Port Macquarie, and they have worked very, very hard through COVID. Their small businesses were looked after last night. Those in work and those not in work are looked after in the future in the mid-North Coast. This budget is one for infrastructure. It is one for the regions. The government is making a record investment of $110 billion of infrastructure, $36 billion of which are in the regions, Mr. Speaker. $110 billion extending to every single corner of this nation. We know the benefits of infrastructure investment flows beyond the project itself into accommodation services, into cafes, into restaurants, into every small business. And we're looking after them, Mr. Speaker. We're looking after workers with tax cuts. It's why we invest in transformational projects. Investment in infrastructure is an investment in small business. It's in our communities. It's an investment in people. It's an investment in the here and now. It's an investment in the future. In total, the Coffs Harbour bypass is being delivered through a $1.46 billion investment by this government. Mr. Speaker, being allocated more than $490.6 million in additional funding under the budget announced last night. The project is expected to support 12,000 direct and indirect jobs, in addition to the 100,000 jobs right across the nation being delivered through our $110 billion record amount of investment that we're putting into infrastructure. These projects are job creators. They're backed by this budget. They will deliver benefits to not just the mid-North Coast, Mr. Speaker, not just the electorate of Cowper, but indeed right across this nation, making sure people get to where they need to be sooner and safer. Our regions are responsible for 40% of national economic output and 2/3 of our exports. And I tell you what, the member for Cowper's electorate, they lead the way too. They lead the way in small business, they lead the way in production, and they love doing it, Mr. Speaker. And that's why we place economic recovery in the heart of our regions. Our regions have been hit hard. They've been hit by bushfires, they've been hit by drought, they've been hit by COVID, but they're coming through. They're leading the way, as you would expect, Mr. Speaker. We've got $200 million for an additional round 5, of the Building Better Regions Fund. It's made such a difference right throughout our regions, such a difference for small business, such a difference for those local councils, $100 million of which is dedicated to tourism-related infrastructure. And I know how hard hit our tourism industry has been hit, Mr Speaker. We're going to get through it. The regions are going to lead the way. The mid-north coast area that the member for Cowper, it'll also lead the way, Mr Speaker.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is addressed to the Prime Minister, and I refer to the fact that the burden of the Morrison recession has disproportionately fallen on women. Why is the government racking up $1 trillion of Liberal debt without a plan to support the participation of women in the workforce? Why has the Prime Minister left women behind in this budget?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Everything the Leader of the Opposition, unsurprisingly, has just said is untrue. Mr Speaker, first of all, Mr Speaker, the recession that has been caused in this country has been caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. This is a fact that seems lost on the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Treasurer, Mr Speaker, and every time he ignores the impact of COVID-19 on the Australian economy, Mr Speaker, he demonstrates, Mr Speaker, his lack of understanding of the Australian economy. Mr Speaker, if you want to do this job, there are two things you particularly have to know about. You need to know about economic management and you need to know about national security. Two issues that this Leader of the Opposition has shown no interest in his more than 20 years in this place. But, Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition raises a very important point, and that is the economic opportunities for women in this country. Now, Mr Speaker, it may come as some surprise to the Leader of the Opposition, but women run small businesses, Mr Speaker. Women pay tax. Women hire other Australians in their businesses. Mr Speaker, women want to drive on safe roads. Women, Mr Speaker, want to go to university and they want to study science and technology and engineering and maths like the Minister for Industry did, Mr Speaker, becoming an accomplished engineer before she came into this place. They want to get apprenticeships, Mr Speaker. They want to get traineeships. They want to get jobs, Mr Speaker, and 60% of the jobs that have come back in measured employment since the pit of the COVID-19 recession, Mr Speaker, have gone to women. And we're on the road to try and restore, Mr Speaker, the record participation of women we were able to put in place before the COVID-19 recession hit, and the gender pay gap was reduced to its lowest level. And those jobs are coming back for women, Mr Speaker. But not content with that, in this year's budget we had the Women's Economic Security Statement. And that statement is $240 million of specific initiatives to support women in their businesses, their entrepreneurship, their training, Mr Speaker, their mentoring support, and to increase their participation in the labour force. But it's not just that, Mr Speaker. In this budget, we have listed Lynparza, Mr Speaker, the ovarian cancer drug, and I can tell you why we have been able to list so many drugs that support women in this country, because we've provisioned for it, we've budgeted for it, we've run an economy, Mr Speaker, that can pay for it. When those opposite were in government, Mr Speaker, they cut funding to the PPS and they didn't list drugs, and the Australian people saw that at the last election, and that's one of the many reasons why they decided not to put them on the Treasury benches. Mr Speaker, we back women because we're getting women in jobs.
The member for Reid.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Skills and Small and Family Businesses. Will the Minister outline to the House how the Morrison government is backing small business to recover from the COVID-19 recession and create more jobs for Australians?
The Minister for Industry, Science and Technology.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. And I know that she, like many of the members on this side of the House, has owned and operated a business herself. And she, like we do, understand how challenging it can be to run a small business. Mr Speaker, it's very clear that the last 6 months have been particularly challenging for our small businesses, and that's why we as a government acted very quickly to support our small businesses, because they are the engine room of our economy and they are the job creators. Mr Speaker, we now are focusing on recovery and the future, and last night's budget was designed to turbocharge our small businesses with their investment and also with their growth. Mr Speaker, when our businesses thrive, they create jobs, they create opportunities for all Australians. And once again, Mr Speaker, we're backing business investment in this budget with $31.6 billion in business tax relief. Now, this includes a massive extension of the very successful instant asset tax write-off, with 99% of businesses being able to write off an asset of any value. This means that small businesses, and that includes our cafe owners, it includes our tradies, it includes our builders, it includes our manufacturers, they're going to be able to boost their productivity by looking at new equipment and new technology, new vehicles, for example, as part of this. Now, Mr Speaker, members on all sides of the House here know how important the instant asset tax right has been to support the businesses in their own electorates. So it does promote opportunities for businesses to grow, for businesses to expand, and that's how they create jobs. But there's many other things in this budget that supports our small businesses. We're providing incentives with the JobMaker hiring credit for businesses to take on new employees and to give our young people a start. We're helping our small businesses access the benefits of digital technology to expand opportunities and to keep them safe online. We're investing in skills training so our small businesses have the pipeline of skilled workers that they need so that they can create the jobs that are needed now, but also the jobs of the future. We're strategically investing in our manufacturing sector because as we scale up our medium and our large enterprises, they will bring with them the small businesses behind them. Mr Speaker, there are some very important initiatives in the budget for our small businesses, and one of the wisest investment that this government can make is to support our small businesses, to create the lasting jobs of the future. That's what this budget does. It is a plan for small business. It's a plan for investment. It's a plan for jobs. It's a plan for our future.
And I now call the member for Franklin.
Thanks, Speaker. And my question is to the Prime Minister. The burden of the Morrison recession has disproportionately fallen on women, but announcements in the Prime Minister's Women's Economic Statement total just 0.024% of the $1 trillion Liberal debt. Why is this government leaving Australian women behind in this budget?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question, and I refer her to the answer that I just gave. Because under this government, Mr Speaker, under this government, we have seen 60% of the jobs that have come back since the pit of the COVID-19 recession go to women, Mr Speaker. What we've seen is this government investment in women getting jobs because we're investing in an economy that can create jobs. Mr Speaker, women will be seeking jobs in manufacturing industries. They'll be seeking jobs in the agricultural industry, Mr Speaker. They'll be seeking jobs right across the economy. But this budget, above all, is a budget for all Australians who are dealing with the challenge of the biggest global recession that we have seen since the Second World War. Now, these facts may escape the Leader of the Opposition and the members opposite, Mr Speaker, as they go on about with their embarrassing reviews, Mr Speaker. But honestly, what we are seeking to do through this budget is get as many women in work as we possibly can, and we're well on the road to doing that. And the Women's Economic Security Statement is our second economic security statement for women, Mr Speaker. The first one delivered by the former Minister for Women, Kelly O'Dwyer, and this one delivered by Senator Marise Payne, the Minister for Foreign Affairs and the Minister for Women. Mr Speaker, our plan for women is ensuring that they do get back into jobs, that the businesses that they may have had to close, that they get to reopen, that the businesses that are going to employ more Australians are able to employ more Australians, and the tax that they pay will be less. Mr Speaker, and as all of Australian families sit around the table at home, they will have woken up this morning with an even greater sense of confidence, a sense of confidence knowing that this government has their back, including women, Mr Speaker, because women are part of an increasing part of our labour force, and they will continue to grow in our labour force because of the skills and the attainment that they're being able to achieve. Under this government, the gender pay gap got to its lowest level. Under this government, the labour force participation of women got to its highest level, Mr Speaker. And that is what we will continue to pursue through the many policies that are outlined in this budget.
The member for Higgins.
Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women. Will the Minister update the House how the Morrison government's economic recovery plan is delivering greater economic security for women, including by creating more jobs and opportunities?
The Minister for Women.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for Higgins for her question and her outstanding leadership in so many women's groups, causes and initiatives, not just in Melbourne but across the nation and the world. I was talking to the member for Higgins this morning about her involvement with Global Sisters, with Tradeswomen Australia, about how she reaches out to working women in her electorate and asks them what they would like to see and responds. She is so connected. Indeed, every woman member on the government side is absolutely across the need for a plan coming out of COVID and out of the budget that provides jobs for women, because our plan for jobs in yesterday's budget is indeed a plan for women, for their participation in the workforce, for their ongoing opportunity and for their financial security, because women's success is intrinsic to our economic success and the success of the nation, and we completely understand that. Now, as the Prime Minister has said, central to all of the measures that we're undertaking to support women in their families and their communities and whatever stage of life they are at is the Women's Economic Security Statement, first introduced by the member for Higgins' predecessor Kelly O'Dwyer in 2018, updated by Minister Payne, senator in the other place, and a huge recognition for her contribution. The updated statement and its associated measures build on what we've already done. Priority areas such as repairing and rebuilding women's workforce participation, greater choice and flexibility for families to manage work and care, supporting women as leaders and positive role models, and supporting women to be safe at home. That's the Women's Economic Security Statement. There's $50 million over 4 years through Women at Work, expanding our leadership and development program. We can continue to partner with industry such as Master Builders and their Women Building Australia program. That's going to be so important. That recruits, retains and supports women entering the construction industry, which is so important right now. It supports women like Melanie and Emma Fasham in Victoria, sisters who run their family construction budget. The member for Higgins mentioned an extraordinary young woman called Grace Halifax, who she helped on a Zoom call to teach her fellow students Zoom. Grace is 8 years old. She'll be an ideal candidate for our Boosting Female Founders initiative, which will support up to 4,300 women entrepreneurs and $24 million to support women in study and to complete STEM qualifications. Record spending in this budget, Mr Speaker, on health, on NDIS, on aged care, on listing new drugs for ovarian cancer, and of course our continuation of JobKeeper that helps so many women in small business, whether they're employees or employers. JobKeeper will help us tackle the tough times ahead. As we come out of COVID, we're helping grow small business. We're helping women gain better jobs. We're helping women
concluded. And I call the member for Kingston.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Why has the government racked up $1 trillion of Liberal debt but refused to provide additional support for childcare, leaving behind mums and dads trying to get back into the workforce?
The Minister for Education.
Good Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for a question because it enables me to detail what was in the budget for the childcare sector. There is a record $9.2 billion worth of funding for the childcare sector. And importantly, and this seems to have been completely overlooked, there was $900 million of additional funding for the childcare sector to support them through the pandemic. $900 million of additional funding. And you know what that led to? That led to 99% of all childcare providers remaining viable throughout the pandemic, providing those services to those on the front line, during the pandemic, those nurses, those doctors, and in particular, and I say this on behalf of all those members here in the House because I'm sure this is one thing we will all agree on, I thank those members who were on the front line when it comes to providing the important services by keeping those childcare services providers open. There were majority of women who were servicing those childcare providers, providing that support.
The member for Kingston is now warned.
Those educators. And we backed them with $900 million of additional funding. And what has that meant? Because those opposite often say, OK, what did this lead to? Well, what have our reforms led to? CPI data shows that our changes on average across the country have delivered real savings to families by reducing out-of-pocket costs by 3.2% from July 2018 to March 2020. We've seen out-of-pocket costs go down under our childcare reforms, and we will continue to provide the support that the sector needs. $900 million of additional funding to help them through the pandemic, a record $9.2 billion in this budget to support the childcare sector throughout this year.
The member for Barara.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Will the Minister please outline to the House how the Morrison government's budget is increasing access to vital mental health support through the course of the COVID-19 recession and ensuring the future mental well-being of all Australians?
The Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Barara. Along with all members in this House, he has a deep interest in mental health and suicide prevention, but he is one of the leaders in this place with his focus on such a profoundly important topic. In any one year, we know that 4 million Australians will face some form of mental health challenge. But this year, above all years, the challenges have been even greater. Flood, fire, drought, and of course the catastrophic human toll of pandemic, the health toll, the lockdown impacts, and the anxiety related to economic circumstances and employment. Significantly, throughout the course of the pandemic, we've worked together with the states and territories and with the opposition and all others to invest in this space, to provide the support, to provide the confidence. Already, over $500 million has been provided through the course of this year with regards to mental health, with telehealth being a fundamental component of that, and now over 33 million services, and mental health remains a huge part of that. And this budget lays down the systemic reform pathway to make telehealth a permanent and abiding legacy of the pandemic for the better. And that's positive for mental health, it's positive for all Australians. As well as that, though, the budget very specifically lays down a framework for the coming 4 years for mental health. In this year alone, there will be $5.7 billion of investment in mental health and suicide prevention support for Australians, and that includes an additional $485 million of mental health funding right now, this year. Very specifically, as part of that, there is the addition and the doubling of the better access psychological support services from 10 to 20 services. That will provide relief and support for many Australians, and it's an important step forward to give them hope, to give them confidence, to give them mental health support. But in addition to that, there's the $64 million which is being provided for the vital work of suicide prevention. That suicide prevention funding comes on top of the $740 million which the Prime Minister and the Treasurer very passionately allocated last year. And that includes $26 million for Headspace, $13 million for extending the National Suicide Prevention Trial Program, and $7 million for Beyond Blue's vitally important Way Back program. And that Way Back program is about giving people hope after they have attempted suicide and recovered and been discharged from hospital. So ultimately, the budget as a whole is about hope and recovery, but the budget for mental health in particular is about hope and recovery and support.
I now call the member for Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Over the past 3 years, 30,000 Australians died waiting for approved home care packages to be delivered. There are 102,000 Australians on the home care waiting list. How on earth can the government rack up $1 trillion of Liberal debt but only announce an average of 6,000 home care places a year over the next 4 years?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Cooper for her question because it gives me the opportunity, as the Treasurer said last night, to remind the House that when we came to government, there were 60,000 in-home aged care places. As a result of the single largest increase in in-home aged care places last night, that figure is now over 180,000. Over the course of our government, we have tripled the number of in-home aged care places in this country, and 97% of those, Mr Speaker, who are seeking aged care places in their home are already either receiving a home care aged care place or some other form of in-home support, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, as the Treasurer made it very clear last night, we are awaiting the recommendation of the Royal Commission into the aged care sector, where we have been very clear that we'll be making a comprehensive response to those recommendations, and that will be done most likely in the course of next year's budget, if not sooner, Mr Speaker. Now, what we can say, though, is that we have delivered $1.5 billion of additional support into the aged care sector through the course of this pandemic. And on top of that, in response to the initial report, the interim report, I should say, of the Royal Commission that called for more aged care places and that called for a number of other actions, Mr Speaker, we responded to all of those last year. And here in this budget we said we would respond again, and we have. We have tripled the number of in-home aged care places in this country with an additional 23,000 last night, Mr Speaker. Now, those opposite don't seem to understand that in aged care you could fund, but you have to be able to ensure that those places can be delivered by the sector itself. And, Mr Speaker, we understand that. And we need to ensure that proper care is paid to those who are receiving those in-home aged care places. And we're not going to go down the reckless path that those opposite pursued when they were in government, throwing money around with no thought to the consequences of how they implement it, Mr Speaker. That was the record of those opposite. That was the record of those opposite who speak today, Mr Speaker, about putting a roof over people's heads. Well, the last time the Labor Party put money into people's roofs, they set them alight, Mr Speaker. They set them alight.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The member for Bruce will cease interjecting. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, we've had this misinformation every day from the
no,
Prime Minister.
His
own Royal Commission found that's not true. Your own
Manager of
Royal
Opposition
Commission.
Business will resume his seat. Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? No. Prime Minister has the call.
The full and comprehensive response that we will provide to the Royal Care Aged Commission will not only continue to deal with the tripling of in-home aged care places that this government has already delivered, Mr Speaker, and on top of that, Mr Speaker, we will deal with the many other issues that are raised in that Royal Commission, as we indicated last night, and we look forward to receiving that report. We have already responded to all the recommendations of both the interim report and the COVID report that was provided by the Aged Care Royal Commission, and we will continue to respond as the Royal Commission makes its recommendations.
The member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government's plan for economic recovery is guaranteeing education and research funding and supporting more job-ready graduates as we come out the other side of the COVID-19 recession?
The Minister for Education. Member for Sydney is now warned.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for his question and for his passion for education. And can I tell the House that in this budget there's record funding for childcare, there's record funding for schools, there's record funding for universities, and there is record funding for research. And we were talking about childcare earlier, and I just wanted to share with the House a couple of quotes from the childcare sector themselves about our record funding of $9.2 billion and our $900 million of additional funding that we provide the sector to get them through the pandemic. This is from Elizabeth Deeth, the Early Learning and Care Council of Australia CEO. We applaud the government's commitment to ensuring that early learning and care services could survive the COVID-19 pandemic. The government's financial support for sector viability was absolutely critical and valued. The Australian Childcare Alliance President Paul Mondo: we commend the government for recognising the unique circumstances facing Victorian early learning services and for continuing the extensive support offered to our vital sector since the beginning of the pandemic. This recovery payment, coupled with the extension of the activity test exemption, ensures financial viability for Victorian service providers during a period of economic uncertainty. That's $9.2 billion of record funding for the childcare sector, including $900 million of new money. When it comes to schools, our budget commits us again to $314.7 billion of record funding between 2018 and 2029. That includes $146.3 million to deliver a range of projects to help support students, family and school communities impacted by COVID-19. There is also record funding for universities, funding that's growing from $18 billion to $20 billion. And under our plan for higher education, 100,000 new places by 2030. And importantly, in the budget, record investment for research in this country. We want research to drive the innovation and the new industries to come out of this pandemic. We want the university sector, through its research, to be one of the drivers of our economic recovery, and that's why we're providing $1 billion of new money for research in this country in this budget. And can I thank the higher education sector for the cooperative way they've worked with the government to ensure that we can make this investment and ensure that they are a key part of driving us through our economic recovery. Mr Speaker, record funding for childcare, for schools, for higher education and research in this budget.
And I now call the member for Gilmore.
Is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that last year the Morrison government announced an annual $200 million recovery and mitigation fund to help communities across Australia prepare for and recover from natural disasters? The next fire season is upon us and not a single dollar has been spent. Why is this Prime Minister always there for the photo op and never there for the follow-up?
The Minister for Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Gilmore for her questions. And yes, there was a fund created, and part of that fund was to provide funding in two tranches. One through $150 million to be able to be spent on rebuilding infrastructure. Now, that hasn't been used because we have created a $2 billion fund in which to rebuild the infrastructure that was devastated by these fires. And that was predicated on the advice of the Director-General of Emergency Management Australia. They didn't believe that it was worth doing that because we had created this other mechanism in which to do that. And to give a perfect example, the electorate of Gilmore itself received nearly $139 million already in direct relief. Now, with respect to the $50 million that is there for resilience building, the Director-General of Emergency Management Australia is taking submissions and, in fact, is about to provide me with some of those programs. And, in fact, I had a conversation with the member for Eden-Monaro only last week about putting forward projects that her community may benefit. This is above politics. This is about people and the people's lives that are impacted. We need to make sure that we understand the trauma that these people went through, and they are at different stages of recovery. We need to allow them and their communities to decide what that recovery looks like, what resilience looks like into the future. To rush that isn't about making sure this is a locally led recovery. This means that it will be a Canberra-led recovery. So we'll continue to engage with communities, with members from both sides of the aisle in a constructive way in rebuilding the lives and livelihoods of those Australians that were destroyed through this bushfire season. We will do that in a calm, methodical way, using Australian taxpayers' money in the most effective way.
The member for Canning.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. Will the minister tell the House how the Morrison government is guaranteeing Australia's national security capabilities and keeping the Australian people safe? And is the minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for Home Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I want to say thank you to the honourable member, not just for his service to our country, but for his chairmanship of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security. He does a fantastic job in that committee and provides an opportunity for us, particularly the agencies in my portfolio, ASIO and others, to work very closely with the committee, and for that I'm very grateful. Mr Speaker, one of the dividends of managing the budget well and making sure that we've taken decisions in recent years to put our country in a strong position financially is so that we can deliver strong essential services. That's a big dividend out of this budget. We've been able to respond to the health pandemic. We've been able to provide support to our hospitals and to many other aspects of the response to COVID-19. But importantly, Mr Speaker, this budget is all about providing the essential services that Australians require, and in particular, one of the highest priorities of this government is to make sure that we can keep Australians safe. The threat of terrorism hasn't gone away. We know the scourge of people smugglers hasn't diminished. We know, Mr Speaker, that we have to make sure that our armed services are provided with all the support that is possible. So last night, Mr Speaker, we provided additional funding, about $1.7 billion to implement the cyber security strategy, which will help keep Australians safe online. And in particular, Mr Speaker, mums and dads who are worried about their kids online, older Australians who might be worried about identity theft, they are the people that we are providing support to. Mr Speaker, I'm also very proud that in the budget last night we were able to provide certainty to the Australian Federal Police and increase their funding. It means that they can provide more frontline services, not just in the cyberspace but in many other areas, including child protection, where they do amazing work each day. Mr Speaker, one of the dividends of managing the economy well, and that has been the focus of the government over a long period of time, as I point out, is to make sure that we can invest into the Australian Defence Force. All of us are incredibly proud of the work that the men and women of the Australian Defence Force have done domestically in the recent natural disasters and the response to the pandemic, but they are working around the world today to keep Australians safe and to serve our interests abroad. And that's why, Mr Speaker, we are investing more than $270 billion in Australia's defence capability over the next decade. It is the biggest investment in defence in decades, and it brings this government's investment in defence up to 2% of GDP. And if we look at Labor's atrocious approach, they dropped defence budgets down to levels that hadn't been seen since before the Second World War. Mr Speaker, we have invested in the essential services and will continue to keep Australians safe.
The Deputy Prime Minister will cease interjecting. The member for Moreton will leave under 94A.
You were striking on the point.
The member for Lyons can leave under 94A as well. This happens after you've been asked to stop interjecting repeated times, so it's sort of not worth explaining any further. The member for Greenway.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Communications. I refer to the National Broadband Network. Will the Minister now admit that fibre is better and more economical than copper?
Good question. The Minister for Communications has the call.
Well, I do thank the Shadow Minister for her question about the National Broadband Network. Let me remind the House of what Labor managed to achieve in their 6 years in the government. Mr Speaker, the fact is that Labor failed to meet every target that they set.
The Minister will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business.
On direct relevance, Mr Speaker, the minister can't just press play on a monotone prepared answer no matter what he was asked.
The Manager of Opposition Business resume his seat. I'm hoping the minister was making an introductory remark of a sentence or two, but the question was specific, and I don't need any help. And he needs to address himself to the subject of the question. The minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. When we came to government in 2013 and inherited a train wreck of a project, we chose the multi-technology mix because it would allow the NBN to be rolled out more quickly. And I want to make three very important points about the strategy we followed.
On my left.
First, the multi-technology mix was quicker. It would let us get to the point where by 2020, 11.8 million premises are able to connect, 99% of premises able to connect, and just imagine the mess Australia would have been in when millions of Australians overnight moved to studying and working from home if we had still been going on the slow broadband plan we inherited from the other side. Now, the second point is that the multi-technology mix was considerably cheaper. It saved $30 billion. And the third point is, and this is really important, we said when we decided on the multi-technology mix that when demand reached the appropriate point, we would then upgrade the network when the demand conditions justified it. Now, the Labor Party finds it very difficult to understand the whole concept of developing a plan and methodically implementing the plan. But that's what we've done. And that's why we now have 11.8 million premises able to connect, and why we are now able to take the next stage in the development of the NBN with 8 million premises going to be in a position to order a speed of up to 1 gigabit per second, and indeed 240 business fibre zones around the country, including 85 in regional Australia, where some 700,000 businesses will be able to order a business-grade optical fibre 1 gigabit symmetrical service, and they'll be able to do it at the same price. NBN will charge the same price as in our CBD areas. So we inherited a train wreck from people who had no clue how to manage a rollout. For 7 years we've systematically turned it round. We've got 99% of premises able to connect, and we can now move to the logical next step, and that is exactly what we are doing, consistent with a plan we've followed for 7 years.
The minister's time has concluded. Members on my left. The member for Nichols.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture, Drought and Emergency Management. Will the minister outline how the Morrison-McCormack government's plan for economic recovery is supporting jobs in regional Australia by slashing red tape and boosting Australian agricultural exports?
The Minister for Agriculture.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the member for Nichols for his question, because he, better than anyone, knows the importance of exports in the agricultural sector, particularly in his seat of Nichols. It has a very rich and proud history of it. But particularly for overall, exports to Australian agriculture are so imperative. We are simply a nation of 25 million people. We produce enough food for 75 million people. So if we don't engage with the world, if we don't trade with the world, then we don't need the number of farmers we've got now, and we don't need the communities that are there to support them, like the Shepherdons of the world. There's over 270,000 Australians that are employed in the farming sector. 3 in 5 of those jobs are tied to international exports. And that's why this government has been proud to secure free trade agreements with China, Japan, Korea, the TPP-11, Hong Kong, Indonesia only in the last couple of months, and now we're working with the EU and UK to secure more trade agreements. But before that, we made significant investments in agricultural counsellors. We've taken them from 16 to 22 positions. And these counsellors sit in embassies and high commissions around the world, and they work at government-to-government level in breaking down non-tariff barriers, getting rid of the red tape at government-to-government level and making market access even greater for our farmers and simpler, saving our farmers money, putting more money back into their pockets. But we're not just looking at those international governments and how we can remove barriers, we're looking at ourselves. And last night we made a significant investment, over $230 million, in streamlining our export platform to make it fit for the future, make it single touch. If you're a citrus grower wanting to export at the moment, you'll fill out 20 pieces of application forms to export your product around the world. This investment will bring it down to one. This is an investment in those communities, in making sure that we get out of their lives as quickly as we can and get them into international markets. But we've gone further than that. We're working with complementary measures with all the industries, whether they be meat, fish, whether they be horticulture or even the grains industry, in looking at how quality assurance is done. And I'm proud to say the red meat sector has led the way on this, and we're looking to invest in technologies even for them. They're now transitioning to smart glasses that are manufactured in Brisbane that allow audits to take place externally. This is saving man-hours and money. So when we are able to undertake these types of initiatives in a constructive way with industries when they're starting at red meat and working through, and we'll consult with those industries, we're going to save that industry alone $40 million a year. They'll go back to the process and back to farm gate. When we implement all these changes, over the next 10 years it will be potentially over $1 billion that will go back through the processing sector to the farm gate. Because if we make these investments and it goes back into those businesses' pockets, they are the ones that are out there employing, creating the new jobs, particularly in regional Australia. This is a smart investment in regional Australia and agriculture in reaching its $100 billion goal by 2030.
The member for Burt.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Only $1.8 billion of the announced $40 billion SME loan guarantee scheme, meant to help small businesses through the coronavirus crisis, had been delivered by mid-September. How can small businesses trust the Prime Minister to deliver anything he announced in the budget to help small businesses when he still hasn't delivered on his last announcement?
The Treasurer.
Well, Mr Speaker, I can confirm that 19,419 businesses have benefited from our small and medium-sized enterprise scheme, and just over $1.8 billion of loans have been made. Now, Mr Speaker, the question is asking about our ability to deliver on our commitments in response to the COVID crisis. So I would like to inform the honourable member that total government support and payments that have already been made in response to the COVID crisis include $112.4 billion. That, in terms of JobKeeper, $60.4 billion. In terms of the cash flow boost, $28.6 billion. In terms of the two economic support payments, the $750 payments, the first was $5.5 billion, the second was $3.8 billion. Then the coronavirus supplement, $14.1 billion, and then the pandemic leave disaster payment of $14.7 million. Now, Mr Speaker, that's even before we gave people access to their own money with early access to superannuation, Mr Speaker, and they went there in the first early release, and $20.1 billion of payments were made, and the second so far $15.6 billion. Now, Mr Speaker, these are measures that have been designed to strengthen and boost the Australian economy, and those on this side of the House, and indeed the Australian community, know that the Morrison government stands with small business, understanding that they are the backbone of the economy. We have cut taxes for small business. Last night we announced a number of measures, including the immediate expensing, the loss carryback measure, which are designed to boost small business. And as the Minister for Infrastructure is well aware, when you have a major project, it supports small businesses right across the country. So, Mr Speaker, only this side of the House stands every day with small business.
The member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Housing. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government's plan for economic recovery is supporting jobs in Australia's construction industry and helping to get more Australians into a home of their own?
The Assistant Treasurer has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the member for Boothby for her question? She is a champion of first home buyers in her electorate and throughout the country, and of course supports one of the most crucial industries in this country, the residential construction industry, which employs up to 1 million Australians. And, Mr Speaker, last night the Morrison government took another step, one of many steps we have taken to support first home buyers getting into their first home, but also supporting again those 1 million Australian men and women who work in the residential construction industry. The Treasurer announced formally last night that we are extending the wildly popular first home loan deposit scheme. Wildly popular. Wildly popular. This was an election commitment that we took to the election. I noticed the member for McMahon mocking it. Yes, he did mock it when we announced the first home loan deposit scheme. He mocked it originally, and since then we've delivered on the first home loan deposit scheme, which allows Australians to get into their first home with a deposit of as little as 5%. Everybody in this House should know that the biggest challenge for first home buyers is getting that deposit together, a deposit where banks are requiring increasingly at least a 20% deposit. For the average home in Sydney, it's taking up to 10 years to save for that deposit. In Melbourne, up to 8 years. The first home loan deposit scheme is halving that time, and last night we announced an additional 10,000 places for this financial year, with one additional caveat, and that is that it is for the purchase of a new home. Because in addition to supporting first home buyers, we want to continue to support the residential construction industry. An additional 10,000 homes will therefore be purchased this year, supporting those workers and also helping those people into a new home. This comes on top of another very successful Morrison government initiative, the Home Builder Scheme. The Home Builder Scheme, which is seeing builders around the country very publicly saying they've got a good problem that they're dealing with, and that is struggling with the amount of work that is now coming in the door. Struggling. I think that's a very good problem to have in this environment. In fact, we just saw last week AKD Softwoods, a timber mill in Colac, which stood down 51 workers in May. 51 workers because they were concerned about the residential construction industry. They have reopened, put all those 51 workers back on and increased their workforce by 25 people. And I quote, they said, "The federal government's home builder stimulus package announced in June was truly effective and created immediate demand. This has resulted in new house construction activities remaining resilient, which is why we're able to bring the workers."
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
There are no papers